Hello viewers, welcome to this insightful lecture on adverse possession, concept and legal provisions. I am Dr. Nishant Kumar Jilova from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar National Law University, Sonipat. Adverse possession is one of the most intriguing yet complex doctrines within property law. It raises important questions about property rights and ownership. Under this doctrine, a person who is not legal owner of a property can become its rightful owner by meeting certain legal criteria. This concept, rooted in the Indian Limitation Act of 1963, challenges traditional notion of ownership and highlights the importance of vigilant property management. Today, we will explore the fundamental principles, legal framework, and judicial interpretations surrounding adverse possession, providing you with a nuanced understanding of its role in property law. By the end of this lecture, learners will be able to define adverse possession and explain its historical and legal background. Understand the key conditions required to establish adverse possession under the Limitation Act 1963. Analyze landmark Supreme Court judgments that have shaped the doctrine of adverse possession in India. Discuss the implications of adverse possession for landowners and claimants. Evaluate the balance between the rights of property owners and those of possessors under the legal doctrine. After completing this lecture, learners will gain a comprehensive understanding of legal framework governing adverse possession in India, insights into the criteria for holding adverse possession, including continuous, open, and hostile possession, knowledge of key judicial interpretations and landmark cases on adverse possession, the ability to critically assess the practical and theoretical challenges posed by adverse possession, an appreciation for the broader implications of the doctrine of property rights and land management. So let's start with the introduction of the topic. Although most people do not know about it, there is an intriguing concept in property law, and that is adverse possession. In essence, they allow anyone to claim ownership to land by fulfilling certain criteria, even without the legal title to the land. One thing to consider is that if someone lives for many years on a piece of land and takes care of it, treating it as their piece of land, and yet doesn't actually hold the piece of land papers. Adverse possession originated in India under the Limitation Act 1963. An owner of land may raise title by establishing that he has possessed the land for a specified period, typically 12 years, under this law. This rule will only apply if the possession has been open, continuous, and without permission of the original owner. Therefore, the person claiming adverse possession must use the land as his or her own and reside on and from it as if it was his or her own, and the original owner or claimant to the land fails to take any steps to claim ownership over it. To get some more clarity on this, let's bring in a story of two neighbors, Raj and Samir. Raj received a parcel of land from his parents and spent little time on it, just being tied down by work and responsibilities. On the other side, next door, Samir could see that Raj's land has grown, overgrown, and out of control. One day, Samir decided to begin to take care of the land. He mowed the land and planted flowers, even put up a tiny fence around it. Years passed, and Samir took care of the land, treating it as his. At the same time, Raj was clueless to any change and didn't bother to check on his property. Samir was confident about his time and effort that he had put into the land after 12 years. En route, he met Raj to talk about the land, who had no interest in it anymore. Samir felt He had grown the land by his care and invoked the doctrine of adverse possession. He argued in the court that he had been open and continuously occupied the land for more than a decade, and so he had taken it as his own. This case shows how adverse possession works, but it also begs for answer as to what is fair and what it is about rights. Should someone lose their property for something they are not using it? That's where the legal nuance comes in. Normally, courts must balance the original owner against the possessor's claim. The jurisprudence of the Indian Supreme Court, though, has aided in defining how adverse possession has shaped up to the extent that the law is fair and balanced. In reality, adverse possession has a practical use in land management. In the meantime, it helps folks in using and taking care of land instead of overlooking it. But it's a reminder too that property owners need to be vigilant. One's rights against their property may be lost through not coming for regular checks and maintenance of their property. Essentials of adverse possession: actual possession on immovable property. Immovable possessor itself means to claim a piece of land or any other property. Should the individual live on and use it as if he was the owner of it? It basically means living and being on the property, keeping or elevating it to its full potential. This might make buildings, plant crops, landscape the area, or ensure it's always in tip-top shape. That is why their action must be open and clear, a clear intention to use the property as their own. Continuous and visible use over time and within a specified period, whether or not legally, many create a claim of ownership to such use. Imagine Jane finds an old abandoned farmhouse. She decided to move in and start living there. Jane doesn't just stay inside, she works hard to make the place better. She repairs the roof so it doesn't leak anymore and takes care of the garden. Making it look nice by doing all this, Jane is demonstrating actual possession of the farmhouse. She is not just claiming it, she is living in it and improving it like a true owner would. Open and notable possession. According to the law of adverse possession, a property needs to be open and easily recognizable. This means that the original owner should have a clear view of it. The person claiming the property cannot secretly use it or do so without letting anyone know. Anyone, including the original owner or someone watching over the property, should be able to see that the someone else is using it. Exclusive possession. The claimant must possess the land exclusively, meaning that they are not sharing possession of the actual owner or the public. Illustration: Sarah starts using a portion of a park for her personal garden. Although she tends to the area exclusively, since it is public land, she cannot claim adverse possession because her possession is not exclusive. Hostile claim. According to the adverse possession, for someone to claim ownership of property, their possession must be hostile or contrary to the rights of original owner. This means that the person claiming the property is doing so without the original owner's consent and against their interests. It is important that the possession is not friendly or based on any lease or agreement with the original owner. Essentially, the claimant must act as if the property truly belongs to them, demonstrating a clear intention to permanently possess and control it, even if it goes against the rights of the rightful owner. For example, imagine a person, Ravi, who moved into an empty house that belongs to someone else named Suraj. So Ravi starts changing things around the property, putting new paints on the walls, planting grass in the yard, but he lives there without permission from Suraj and he treats the house like his. With this, Ravi is going to step in front and confront the ownership of Suraj on the property. This is also why this case it could be considered that Ravi has been doing hostile possession of the house and that he can claim the house after a certain period of time, provided he meets all the legal requirements. Continuous and uninterrupted possession. To make a claim of adverse possession, possession needs to be continuous and uninterrupted. This implies that the claimant should occupy the submitted land without the interference from the real owner for an agreed time frame. Adverse possession laws require that the period for this last be continuous for 12 years for private land and 30 years for government properties. For example, imagine someone living in an empty house that they moved into and kept over time. They must do this without legal challenge from the original owner over a period of 12 years during this 12-year span. In this case, if the true owner doesn't do anything to reclaim their property within this time frame, then a claim for adverse possession may stand. But the claim is invalid if there is an interruption in the possession or if the rightful owner start legal proceedings during this period. Legal provision in India. Legal framework governing adverse possession in India is primarily summarized in the Limitation Act of 1963, particularly Section 27 and Article 65, Section 27 of the Limitation Act 1963, which says, at the determination of the period hereby limited to any person for instituting a suit for possession of any property, his right to such property shall be extinguished. This section means that if a person does not file a legal suit to reclaim possession of their property within the time period specified under the Limitation Act, their legal right to that property is permanently extinguished. In simpler terms, failure to act within the time limit set by law results in the loss of ownership rights. If the rightful owner does not file a suit to recover possession of their property within the legally allowed time, they permanently lose their ownership rights. Article 65 provides the time limit for filing a suit to reclaim possession of immovable property. The rightful owner has 12 years to take legal action, starting from the moment someone else's possession of the property becomes adverse to the owner's interests. Adverse possession means that someone occupies the property in a manner that conflicts with the rights of the rightful owner, openly and without permission. Article 112 provides a 30-year limitation period for suits by or on behalf of the government to reclaim possession of the immovable property. Adverse possession signifies that if person occupying continuous, uninterrupted and hostile possession of government land for 30 years, the government may not regain its property if the condition of adverse possession are met. Commencement of limitation period for adverse possession. Now in the adverse possession context, limitation period under Indian law, it is when the possessor occupation adverse to the owner interests occurs that the time frame set by law begins, whereby the property owner has the time in which to take action to regain possession of the property. Article 65 of the Limitation Act 1963 primarily governs as to how long the suit should remain in light of possession of immovable property or any other interest therein founded on title. The time begins to tick from the moment that the defendant's possession becomes adverse to the plaintiff. The Supreme Court of India has reaffirmed this interpretation in recent judgments. In the case of Neelam Gupta and others versus Rajendra Kumar Gupta and another, the court emphasized that the limitation period for establishing title by adverse possession commences from the date the defendant's possession becomes adverse. not from the date the plaintiff acquire ownership rights. To illustrate, consider a scenario where an individual occupies another's property without permission. The limitation period for the rightful owner to initiate legal action begins when this occupation clearly becomes hostile to the owner's interests, meaning the occupier is openly treating the property as his own without acknowledgement of the owner's rights. If the owner does not take action within 12 years from this point, they may lose the legal right to reclaim the property, and the occupier could potentially acquire ownership through adverse possession. It's important to note that the possessor must demonstrate continuous, open, and hostile possession for the entire statutory period to successfully claim adverse possession. The burden of proof lies with the individual asserting adverse possession to establish that their occupation meets all legal requirements. Adverse possession in India. State and tenant perspectives. Adverse possession is a legal doctrine that allows a person to claim ownership of land under specific conditions, provided that they can demonstrate possession that meets certain criteria. In the Indian context, adverse possession is governed primarily by the Limitation Act of 1963, which lays out the statutory period required for a claim to be valid, typically 12 years for private property and 30 years for government lands. The legal nuance surrounding this doctrine raise pertinent questions, particularly regarding whether the state can claim adverse possession over citizens' property and whether tenant can make similar claims. Now the question comes, can the state claim adverse possession over citizens' property? The law of India has remained keenly interested in the question whether the state can acquire adverse possession over private citizens' property. The Supreme Court of India has outlined in the case of Haryana versus Mukesh Kumar. According to the ruling, the doctrine of adverse possession is mainly established to protect private property rights. The fundamental principles of property and public interest prevented the state, as a representative of the public, from claiming adverse possession against its citizens, the court pointed out. The judgment, however, remained the court that the state must comply with due process before it comes in possession of any land belonging to the private people. This judgment reaffirms further that property rights are fundamental and the state owes duty of protecting the same. Another question comes, can a tenant claim adverse possession? The Supreme Court has also investigated the question of whether a tenant can assert adverse possession against its landlord. This came before Krishan Lal Mehla versus Shankar Rao Mehla. The court held that a tenant could not claim adverse possession against their landlord where he was alive and in possession of the property. The principle has its foundation on principle that a tenant's possession is never considered to be adverse to the landlord as long as relationship of tenancy exists. It is held that pursuant to the restrictions on adverse possession, that is, the possession is deemed to be under the authority of the landlord, where it does not satisfy the requisite element of hostility necessary for such a claim, but they will indeed be allowed to apply for ownership if a tenant remains in possession after the termination of the tenancy and meets adverse possession criteria such as open, continuous and hostile possession for the requisite period. However, this has to be made clearly with regard to legal channels and burden of proof falls upon the tenant. Circumstances preventing adverse possession claims. Possession under agreement or license. Possessing property with permission of the true owner of any length of time is not adverse. Take for example, a tenant currently living on a property and they possess it, as this possession is given by the lease agreement and such tenant cannot claim adverse possession as the landlord has licensed them to stay on such property. Government land. Most of the Indian jurisdictions, even some of the states, have prohibition of adverse possession claims to the government land. The purpose is that it protects public lands from being appropriated for its proper public use and development. Incomplete title. The claimant may be defeated in his claim for adverse possession if he lacks a complete or valid title to the property. For instance, if someone complains of possession on a bad title or unrecorded transfer, such claim may well be invalid. Involvement of minors or unsound mind. If though the person with adverse possession is a minor or had been declared of unsound mind, the period of adverse possession does not start until they become of age or have regained mental capacity. It safeguards vulnerable individuals' rights and allow them to recover ownership of property that they can assert. Prior notice of ownership. If the true owner has sent a notice to the possessor indicating their intent to recover the property, an adverse possession made after that is not likely to be true. If an owner attempts to reclaim the land, a possessor cannot continue to live there. Use of force of coercion. But if the land is held in adverse possession, if one cannot prove how it was obtained in the first place by way of coercion or force, thereby negating the position of adverse possession, which presupposes peaceful and open occupation of the land. Public policy and special laws. Some land may be regulated by particular legislation that forecloses the prospect of adverse possession. For instance, properties held for specified public use or otherwise classified as environmentally sensitive. For instance, properties held for specified public use or otherwise classified as environmentally sensitive may enjoy more secure standing against adverse possession claims than do other properties. Supreme Court judgments on adverse possession. From the time till now, India's Supreme Court has passed several landmark judgments which have explained and defined how adverse possession has been applied in the nation. Some of the notable cases include Krishan Ram Mehla versus Shankar Rao Mehla. In this case, it was held that the continuous and uninterrupted nature of possession is important. Adverse possession must be something living beyond mere occupation, the court ruled, and should really be a claim of ownership to the property. The ruling noted that possession for 12 years would not have resulted in ownership if such period was not of open, continuous, and adverse possession. State of UP versus Amir Chand. In this judgment, the doctrine of adverse possession could not apply in cases involving the government land. The adverse possession of the government land is not allowed by the Supreme Court because such claim will bring into contradiction the policy of public interest and the right of the state with respect to its property. Babulal versus Hajarilal Khatik. This ruling gave a complete analysis of the way of establishing adverse possession. If a person is in continuous possession for more than 12 years and cannot show the original owner has attempted to take possession back, the court held that such person may claim ownership. Statutory limitations assume that no individual will be deprived of his land who has exercised his rights and after doing so has managed his land in good faith. Ravinder Kaur Garewal versus Manjeet Kaur. It was held by the court that if someone is in continuous possession of property for more than 12 years, then such person could claim absolute possession unless it can be shown that there was an attempt to reclaim possession by the real owner. It should be clear that statutory limitations do not prevent individuals who have exercised their rights and prudently managed the land from doing so. In conclusion, adverse possession is a complex legal concept within property law. In essence, this doctrine states that an individual can own land if he isn't the owner of the land. Adverse possession, as it is known in India, is governed through the Limitation Act, which sets down its time limitations and conditions under which a man may claim it. Further, this framework defines the duration of possession requirement as well as requirement that the possession be continuous, open, and hostile to the original owner's interest. Adverse possession in India is a conflicted but powerful legal rule which affects property law, much like any other type of institution. Its main purpose is to foster the productive use of land and another tool to ensure land is not stolen. It is based on the Limitation Act 1963, governed by the doctrine which specify that the clear criteria of possession to be considered adverse, such as open, continuous, exclusive, hostile occupation for a statutory period. Thank you for joining this lecture on adverse possession concept and legal provisions. I hope you found the session informative and engaging. Stay continuous and continue exploring the fascinating world of law. See you in the next lecture.